Everybody, welcome back. Thank you for coming back and joining us. I hope you all had a lovely lunch break. We're now going to jump into two more talks, and as per the last two talks, there'll be chance for questions at the end of both of those talks. So the first speaker is going to be Julia Griffin. She is one of the co-curators of the Young Poland exhibition and has done an absolutely fantastic job with Rasheen of making the beautiful exhibition that you saw in Rasheen's talk. She's going to speak to you a little bit about Stanislaw Wyspiański and Karol Kłosowski, and compare the two and how they were influenced by Morris, and make that comparison between them. And then we're going to hear from Kasha Garpi. She's a contemporary artist and a PhD candidate, and she's going to look at the broader role of young Poland and the arts and crafts movement and how it relates to contemporary arts and crafts today in Poland. So without any further ado, once again, I will hand you over to Julia.
Thank you, Sophie. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here today. Beauty as a Weapon, the title of my talk, is a headline coined by the new European journalist Richard Holledge. In his review of the Young Poland exhibition, he concluded, quote, "After all, a movement that can make a coffee cup into a token of subversion can survive anything." And they did, unquote. Wyspiański and Kłosowski believed that everyday objects and interiors were encoded carriers of Polishness, and as such had an agency to bring about independence. And they were right, they succeeded. Well, firstly, I would like to extend heartfelt thanks to my dear colleagues at the William Morris Gallery, to dear Rasheen, Rowan and James, and to Andrzej from Krakow for this amazing team effort and for going the whole hog. I think this can become a motto of this project. With the exhibition coming to a close this weekend, exactly 3 years after James Gray's initial idea, I thought it would be lovely to take a moment to reflect on our journey. As an Anglo-Polish curator, I feel truly humbled and overwhelmingly proud of what we have achieved in our little team, and immensely grateful to colleagues who have made it all possible. The project has enjoyed an unprecedented level of interest from the general public and critics alike, and there have been ecstatic responses on social media. The book is amazingly an international Amazon bestseller at number 24 on Amazon UK and number 1 Amazon in Poland. And it has been also nominated for the Best American Book Award for Outstanding Achievement in Museum Scholarship. The winner will be announced at the end of January. We've also had 31,000 visitors, as James has confirmed, despite the pandemic. And in terms of some tangible impacts, the profile of our project has played a key part in Karol Kłosowski's Silent Villa receiving a major renovation grant from the Polish government last year, safeguarding its future. The National Portrait Gallery has acquired a likeness of Maria Pawlikowska-Jasnorzewska for their Unwritten Narratives of Women project, and the bank, PKOSA, has launched a virtual museum of its art collections online as a result of working with us on the exhibition. So I feel truly overwhelmingly proud with what a committed team of people has achieved together. In terms of the most fundamental differences between the British and the Polish arts and crafts movements, there was the question of territory. Poland did not exist for 123 years due to political occupation versus the territorial expansion of Britain at the same time. Poland, and especially Galicia, the Austrian partition was totally untouched by industrialization, whereas, of course, the British arts and crafts reformers were fighting the dehumanizing effects of the Industrial Revolution. However, both groups of makers were fighting for the preservation of an endangered cultural identity. In the case of the Polish makers, crafts were seen as a way of reclaiming their national past and as a way of combating the influx of machine-produced goods from Austria. And in the case of the British makers, crafts were a way of sort of reconnecting with the pre-industrial cultural ideal. So let's take a moment to have a look at the parallels between Stanislaw Wyspiański and Morris. Wyspiański was based in Kraków, and that the historic town of Kraków largely defined the nature of his output. Like Morris, he was a polymath. He was a visual artist and a writer. He was equally versatile as a craftsman and equally versatile as an interior decorator. He designed schemes for churches, civic buildings, and homes. He was also committed to the preservation of historic buildings, and he was a perfectionist, and he had a tireless work ethic, just like Morris. And he's also considered as a foremost reformer of the book Beautiful. Like Morris, Wyspiański's marriage was a mesalliance. He married a Krakowian peasant, and intermarriages between the middle classes and the upper classes and the peasantry were a sign of what they were a symbol of the unification of the divided Polish nation. It was also an expression of Wyspiański's belief in social equality, and also it was not uncommon amongst Bohemian artists across Europe. For example, Morris married the daughter of a stable hand, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti married his model, who was the daughter of a cutlery merchant. So I wanted to talk to you about Wyspiański's unique way of conveying cultural identity by means of sense of place, and how he achieved, how he conveyed sense of place was through a unique combination of indigenous plants and historical relics. I'm showing you the cover of the Kraków Annual, which was a conservation journal dedicated to the preservation of historic buildings. And here, Wyspiański juxtaposes the cross-section of the yellow stinging nettle, which was one of the most popular weeds growing on the bank of the Vistula River, and the shape of the crown of King Casimir the Great, who was one of Poland's most powerful, greatest kings. This crown was actually accidentally rediscovered during a renovation of the king's tomb at Wawel Cathedral in the 1860s. And it was considered as a sign of the ghost of the king coming back to help the indomitable Polish people during their political occupation. The iconography of the wall paintings at the medieval Franciscan church in Krakow is another example of this concept of conveying identity through sense of place by means of a combination of local plants and historical relics. So here, Wyspiański juxtaposed flowers such as wild roses, pansies, nasturtiums, with the heraldic eagles taken from historical Jagiellonian dynasty coins as a way of conveying the spirit of his beloved Poland. Like Morris, Wyspiański had a lifelong preoccupation with flowers and with repeating floral patterns. And in fact, Wyspiański was the first Polish artist to have developed a serious preoccupation with botany as a subject for his art and for his designs. Here I'm showing a juxtaposition of one of Morris's most iconic patterns that Rowan had spoken about, roses against a trellis, juxtaposed with Wyspiański's own pansies against a monumental trellis at the Franciscan church. So the next sort of unknown aspect of Wyspiański's output we have presented at the exhibition is his preoccupation with the vernacular crafts of the Podhale Highlanders from the village of Zakopane. One of his most interesting projects was the play King Bolesław the Bold, about a medieval Polish king who murdered the bishop. He murdered Bishop Stanislaw, and this conflict was shown by Wyspiański as the root cause of the weakening of Poland and as the root cause of the partitions. However, instead of sort of drawing on his detailed antiquarian archaeological knowledge of the past, Wyspiański has chosen to design the king's costume based on the material culture of the Highlander shepherds and the Krakowian peasants instead, because he viewed the Podhale material culture as a repository of traditional Polish design motifs and traditional Polish values. So here, just a couple of details from the stage design. So Wyspiański designed the king's crown in the bottom left, based on the humble Highlander accessory, the pin used for holding together the Highlanders' shirts. So in doing so, he elevated humble shepherd jewels to the status of the crown jewels. Similarly, he used the Highlander cheese mold used for making sheep's milk cheese for the shields for the king and the whole of his court. Of course, this preoccupation with vernacular crafts was very much shared with Morris, who used a vernacular Sussex chair for one of his most famous furniture ranges, for the Morris and Co. Sussex chair on the right. So another example of Wyspiański's preoccupation with the vernacular Podhale crafts, he used the shape and the ornamental features of a laundry bat, shown in the middle, to design a couple of chairs, as well as a wool frieze. Again, Wyspiański used a Highlander shepherd's spoon rack, shown in the bottom left, a rack used for storing spoons and ladles for cooking, to design several chairs, medieval-looking chairs. Do have a look at the crenellation, which mirrors the shape of the spoon rack, and also the Highlander motif of the 6-petal rosette, which he used on a series of furniture for the Zieleński dining room. So now let's have a quick look at Wyspiański's student, Karol Kłosowski. Karol Kłosowski was an incredible polymath. He designed furniture, textiles, lace, paper cuttings. He was also a painter. He was a genius for ornament, and he was a pillar of the Zakopane artistic community. He was a co-founder of the Podhale Art Society, committed to preserving local craft traditions whilst advancing the contemporary art scene. He was a co-founder of the Kilim Association, and he was also a teacher at the Wood Craft Vocational School and at the lace making school. So in terms of the photograph on the right is showing Kłosowski at his studio at work doing a paper cutting. In terms of his philosophy, he was very much committed about cultural democracy, everybody's right to beauty in everyday life, irrespective of one's financial or social status. He was also committed to the equality and integration of all arts, humble paper cutting being as important as a refined piece of furniture or as a painting. Finally, he was interested in preserving Poland's unique heritage through sort of recording and engaging with folk ornamental motifs. This is just a selection, a spectrum of his work. So on the left, it's a wooden dresser, which is customized with a peacock paper cutting. In the top right, an elaborate wooden bookbinding customized with the spider web lace. So that just shows you Kłosowski's integration of all the arts. In the bottom right, one of his most famous pictures at bobbin lace making legend, showing his beloved daughter. The head-on composition is reminiscent of an altarpiece, and it evokes sort of the spiritual, sacred aspects of handiwork. However, perhaps one of Kłosowski's most important contribution to the young Poland design was resuscitating the humble art of the folk paper cutting. He used it as a manifesto of cultural democracy and considered it as a unique repository of Polish design motifs. A paper cutting was invented in peasant households in the 19th century as a way of decorating their windows, initially as a replacement for net curtains, and then for decorating the walls. And it can be made very cheaply and very easily by folding paper across several axes of symmetry. So here, Kłosowski's paper cuttings look a little bit like mandalas. They demonstrate his inherent understanding of the universe, his fascination with nature, the rhythmic beauty and the rhythmic dynamic beauty, and the character of the depicted creatures is reminiscent of Morris's iconic designs, such as the Strawberry Thief or Brother Rabbit. Kłosowski's, the apex of Kłosowski's artistic achievement is his House Beautiful at Zakopane that Roisin was telling you about, Silent Villa. He created it over the period of 20 years, beautifying each and every corner of the house. In a way, the Silent Villa was Kłosowski's Kelmscott, the only difference being that William Morris, unfortunately, was unable to spend extensive periods of time at Kelmscott because of his business pressures in London, whereas Kłosowski settled down in Zakopane at the Silent Villa in 1907, and he lived there until the end of his life in 1971. So this is an interior of his studio in the garret, showing you, you know, the loving details of each and every corner. His bed, because he frequently worked until the early hours of the morning, and the aesthetic of the place. Like Wyspiański, he also married a country dweller, a Highlander poetess, Katarzyna. And finally, just a few words about this iconic object that Roisin has already mentioned, and which appears to be one of the star objects of our exhibition. As my husband, Ted, who's British, said after visiting our exhibition and seeing this door in the flesh, Ted said, "Julia, if whoever looks around this exhibition and looks at this door doesn't feel very emotional, it means either they have no soul or they are dead." So the iconography of this door, the spider weaving its web between two branches of a rowan tree, is a metaphor of the celebration of handiwork and the celebration of creativity, but also an autobiographical comment about Kłosowski's own status as a master craftsman and about his own practice, referring to his preoccupation with lace and with paper cuttings, but the nature of these media being not too dissimilar to the meticulous circular beauty of the spider's web. Finally, if you would like to learn more about our exhibition and about the heroes of our story, do read the book and do visit our website. Once again, heartfelt thanks to my dear colleagues for making it all possible.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was such a beautiful presentation with so much wonderful imagery. I really hope all the participants got to appreciate from that some of the intricate designs that come through so wonderfully from the Young Poland movement. Thank you, Julia. So now we're going to pass on to Kasha Garpi. She is a PhD student and a contemporary artist in Poland, and she's actually living in the UK, apologies, she's Polish. She's going to be talking to you about the Young Poland movement and how it's influenced contemporary artists today. So over to you, Kasha.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, so my name is Kasha Garpi. I'm a contemporary artist and researcher at, I'm doing a practice-led PhD at the Slade School of Fine Arts in London. But originally I'm from Krakow. And I'm not only from Krakow, but partially I'm also from Zakopane. And it's so heartwarming to see the exhibition in London and to see the works with which I have extreme emotional connection throughout all my life, I have to say. So I was invited to address this broader role of Young Poland and arts and crafts movement as it relates to contemporary Polish art and design, but I will be concentrating mostly on on contemporary art, and I divided this talk into two sections. In the first section, I will be more talking about Krakow, and then in the second section, I will be talking about Zakopane, with hopefully some informations which I'm not going to repeat from the previous talks that were delivered today. And so the second part would be the description of the project I'm currently developing in Zakopane. Despite my personal history, Paradoxically, my interest in arts and crafts, and specifically Zakopane, materialized through John Ruskin and a village of Coniston in Lake District. In 2014, I was invited to Grisdale Arts Residency in Rawson Park, just above Coniston Water, that led to 2 projects, and subsequently my practice-led PhD at the Slade. My deeper interest in Zakopane emerged in the context of comparing how these 2 distant places, Coniston and Zakopane, presented the opportunity to explore the diverse yet connected historical trajectories where the key element of contributory economy in the past and to some extent in the present has been the arts and crafts movement. In the past, Zakopane and Coniston were both rural, traditional mining villages, peripheral places untouched by modernity. They both became important places of art and intellectual creativity, using the romantic vision of proximity of nature and culture and establishment of a unique style, merging rural with the urban. Today, Coniston is still rural, small and peripheral, yet an important site on the map of Britain due to the presence of Grisdale arts. Zakopane, however, became the victim of its own success and is now a busy, expensive tourist resort with its unique architecture style in places overrun by new developments. I collaborated with Grisdale Arts on House of Ferment project and curated its Polish edition at 2015 Art Bomb Festival in Kraków. Art Bomb Festival was an interdisciplinary site-specific event presenting art in public realm. Festival's principles included social and community activities facilitated by artists and accessible by general public. Each of the 7 editions of the festival had a different theme and was aimed at widening the circle of participants and instigating a debate about issues related to improving the city's public spaces. The 2015 edition of the festival concentrated on the transformation of the countryside into the city. As pointed out by the organizers of the festival, Kraków is particularly well suited to studying such relationships for 2 interrelated reasons. First, namely being the cradle of the Young Poland movement, with its fascination with folklore, folk customs, and proclaimed return to nature, a peasant mania, as it was colloquially referred to in Poland. Second, yes, as equally important, year 2015, excuse me, marked 100 years since the plan to create Greater Kraków was finalized. Between 1910 and 1915, neighboring towns, including several villages, such as Zwierzyniec, Obronowice, made famous by Stanislaw Wyspiański's play The Wedding, were incorporated into the city. What is important, it was a first regulation plan in the history of Polish urban planning, several years ahead of the similar plans of Greater Lwów or Greater Warsaw. Here, I would like to show some selected examples of the projects that were commissioned for the festival. We are looking at Anna Królikiewicz's work titled Honeymoon, that was shown in Zwierzyniecki House, a branch of the Museum of Kraków, representing what can be described as a village house from the end of the 19th century. Referring directly to Stanisław Wyspiański, The Wedding, artists aimed to emulate a 19th century wedding party. A site-specific work placed in close proximity to the original setting of Wesele in Bronowice, its roots ingrown into Wyspiański's drama and the marriage between the young peasant woman from the outskirts of Kraków and a bohemian. In her work, Królikiewicz refers to the wedding table, paradoxically absent in the play, studies sources from the era, and in her research for context and form asks whether she can reproduce something of which she only has barely an idea, whether she can give form to something that does not exist, whether she can reach the matter that was connected with both a celebration and everyday life. The contemporary audience arrived at this wedding towards its end, perhaps with an atmosphere permitted by the spirit of the wedding night, perhaps to find only the leftovers or after party. Królikiewicz filled 2 rooms with honey and straw, creating a thick atmosphere filled with scent of honey. She also soaked the wallpaper with honey, leaving small sections for viewers to sample. The work was a result of artist's intense research. In order to make the work, she went through Wyspiański's sketches, personal notes, and also pages from family culinary notes from Wyrydlówka, Lucian Riedel's house in Bronowice, where original wedding took place. Another example of work directly referring Wyspiański's wedding is more recent work by Dominika Olszowy. In her sculptural installation titled Chochoł's Wet Dream, she recreates famous Chochoły dance, shown here at the Battlefield exhibition at Bielska Galeria in 2020. Going back to 2015 Art Boom Festival, I would like to present Daniel Richarskis' A Monument to the Peasant, a work that concerns in its essence the contemporary image of Polish countryside and its identity. Created for the festival, the monument to the peasant was treated as a tool to help in understanding of the social history of the countryside in Poland, especially after 1989. According to scholar Tomasz Rakowski, its functioning resembled a pilgrimage of particular object passed from hand to hand, traveling through individually selected cities on the route from Richarskis' village of Kurówko to Kraków. The ritual of the pilgrimage is on the one hand a reference to the stereotypical image of folk religiosity, and on the other hand is an attempt at creating a secular holiday, building a community around the object, which becomes a platform for expressing one's own views. The journey from Kurówko ended in front of Krakow's National Gallery. Working with Grisdale Arts in Kraków and relating to the theme of Art Boom 2015 festival, we presented a project titled House of Ferment, an innovative artistic project which celebrates various aspects of culture at the international, national, regional, local, and personal levels. A mobile installation based on domestic rural ladder, and in its design based on the mountain scene from Coniston. At its core, the House of Ferment is a collection of bacterial cultures used in food conservation processes, collected and used during the last decade in artist Karen Gurti's country house in the Lake District. The collection of cultures and Karen's fermented food is connected with her heirloom vessels and kitchen equipment, which also contain the personal memories and associations of the artist. Incorporated into the installation are also functional elements constructed by artists who collaborate with Grisdale Arts, such as table designed by Lord Provost or the vessels made by Bedwyr Williams. In its Kraków edition, the House of Ferment refers to the history of Zwierzyniec district and especially the area of Salvator and Królowej Jadwigi Street, between Salvator and Fosza Street, and has its source in the word transformation. On the one hand, it literally refers to the transformation of rural areas into urban, and on the other hand, it refers to the chemical processes that take place during fermentation. Salvator is an undeniable unique place for Kraków. Unlike the remaining villages that were incorporated into the city at the beginning of 20th century, this area, despite being located close to the center of the city, kept its suburban, on occasions rural character. Currently, mainly thanks to efforts of its residents, it was partially protected from voracious urban development. Miraculously, relics of the district's rural past have been preserved in the form of several houses at Królowej Jadwigi, Emmaus, and Zaścianek streets. One of these houses, belonging to my family friend Uta Kalinowska, an antique dealer, is the titular House of Ferment. Local residents were invited to not only try what House of Ferment had to offer, but also to share their own produce and recipes. For me, as an artist and researcher, the most important aspect of arts and crafts movement to the legacy today can be summed up as follows. Firstly, by the ideas revolving around social values and the role of artists and art that are playing in society. Then our relationship with nature, and finally, the importance of art education. The project that attempts to address these three key points is a site-specific project I have developed together with an artist, Małgorzata Mirgatas, in collaboration with Tatra Museum and Antoni Kenar School in Zakopane. Zakopane, along with its important cultural history, has also its own interesting social history. A short story of Zakopane, a town we know today, started in late 1600s as a small settlement of only 43 inhabitants. In the early 1800s, the population grew to almost 2,000. By the mid-1800s, thanks to iron mines in Kościelisko and iron works in Kuźnice, Zakopane became a center for mining and metallurgy that attracted large numbers of people in search of jobs. The country was known at the time as the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria, and according to authors of the book Absent Town Guide to Unknown Zakopane, published in 2016 by Tatra Museum, it was the poorest part of the Habsburg monarchy, known for provincial destitution, economical disaster, corruption, and defunct administration. Authors of the book quote a statistical journal published in 1888, which claimed that Galicia at the time was the poorest country on earth. Meanwhile, in the 1870s, with progress of the medical sciences, the health benefits of the mountain air and springs of the Tatras were acknowledged as helpful in the treatment of respiratory diseases. The beauty of the landscape and proximity to nature were also recognized as beneficial for health. By 1886, Zakopane gets the status of climatic station, attracting huge numbers of people, mostly tuberculosis sufferers. Unique flora and fauna of the Tatra Mountains were also instrumental in establishing Zakopane as place to be for a variety of ethnographers, artists, and writers. The interest in simple, more natural ways of living simulated a call to return to crafts. By 1880s, School of Wood Carpentry and School of Lace Making were established in Zakopane with honorable intentions to teach Highlander youth necessary craft skills and to promote application of local decorative motifs. Within 2 decades, around 1900s, Galicia witnessed the revival of vernacular building and Highlanders crafts in the Tatras, as you can see in exhibition. But also by the 1900s, in addition to mountain climate and hot springs, fame of Zakopane as a place of beauty and tradition was already established. Zakopane became a fashionable resort, the Polish equivalent of Swiss Davos. It attracted an unprecedented influx of people, with private sanatoriums and health institutions blooming. However, in 1902, the town still did not have a sewage system nor public hospital. With the influx of stylish and wealthy visitors came a large number of poorer TB sufferers who couldn't afford the treatment, but hoped that by finding jobs in the hospitality business in Zakopane, at least they will benefit from the mountain air. Unfortunately, they were spreading the disease and the town was at the verge of sanitary and epidemic catastrophe. Instead of dealing with the problem, the mayor of Zakopane, Andrzej Hramiec, insisted on installing new gas lanterns for the main Krupówki Street. In 1902, Stanisław Witkiewicz wrote a series of articles in the local press titled The Bog. The bog was used as a metaphor for Zakopane and cliques ruling the town. The articles resulted in a libel suit by Mayor Hramiec against Witkiewicz. Witkiewicz has won the trial, but in fact the sewers were not built till 1938, and the situation was far from being resolved by the time of Witkiewicz's death in 1915. Now fast forward over 120 years to 2022, and the project I just want to briefly talk about is directly inspired by Stanisław Witkiewicz's articles and his problems with Mayor Hramiec. Around 30,000 people populate today's Zakopane. But in tourist season, which in fact lasts almost the whole year, the resort can be visited by up to 2.5 million people. Visitors to Zakopane would be sold the mountain views, heritage, and air of dubious freshness at the moment, but also the rural experience and the Highlander culture. One of the attractions became an obligatory photo with Highlander shepherd's dog, or curiously, a white bear. Zakopane is bordering the Tatra National Park. The clash between the town hall encouraging unlimited tourist influx and the national park would be a thick volume of it on its own. But in recent years, it got a face, the phrase, face of the brown bear. According to Tatra National Park, in the Tatras on both sides of the border between Poland and Slovakia live around 50-60 bears. In November 2019, Zakopane was a witness to a wave of protests against planned New Year's Eve celebrations. The celebrations, organized as a joint venture between Zakopane Town Hall and Polish National Television, hence sponsored from public money, was advertised under the catchy title, New Year's Eve of Your Dreams. The main problem arose when the public was notified that New Year's Eve of Your Dreams will take place not on the open spaces of Zakopane Common Green, but instead at the very edge of Tatra National Park, in the area where the park literally borders with inhabited dwellings of the town. Protesters, including a large group of local youth, as the main arguments against the loud mass event, were pointing out the danger for the local fauna and the population of local brown bears in particular. Variety of examples of unnecessary disturbance to animal welfare were produced, including a sad story of a brown bear's death as a result of premature awakening from winter hibernation by New Year's Eve fireworks back in 2016. Protesting youth, mostly local secondary school pupils, carried a figure of brown bear on the makeshift stretcher around the town and all the way to the town hall. The town governors bent to the protesters' demands and the event was moved. But that story, however, is not without the precedents. Zakopane, particularly from the beginning of its existence, is tormented by the conflict between admirers of nature and culture and the development of mass tourism. Sanitary and health catastrophe at the early stages of its functioning as a spa and pure economy related to the influx of visitors or the town's ambitions to become a Polish capital of culture, in contrast with mass culture and common kitsch present occasionally on its streets. Project I'm developing in Zakopane is titled Miś and is built around these contradictions. The main inspiration, as it was said, is the famous white bear posing for the souvenir photos with tourists on the streets of Zakopane. In Polish, word miś has multiple meanings. In most simple translation, it is a small bear, a teddy, a fluffy, cuddly toy, but it can mean a young bear, an animal. In colloquial language, it can be a man, slow or stocky, or very nice, admirable. Title of the project Miś is a metaphor simultaneously representing what is wild, untamed, dangerous, but also what is familiar and predictable, nature and culture, tradition and package holidays. Miś is simultaneously Ursus arctos, a brown bear that 250,000 years ago was exploring Europe, as well as white bear that as a souvenir photo found its way to millions of family albums in Poland throughout the decades. Project Miś was convinced during my visit to the home of artists Małgorzata Mirgatas and Marcin Tas in small village of Czarnagóra near Zakopane. In a project, participants, including your local youth from Antoni Kenar School, will be dressed as white bears and we will be walking around the streets of Zakopane in May 2022, talking to people about heritage, about culture, and about relationship we want to have with nature in places like Zakopane, where nature was important in shaping its essence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulina. That was really fascinating. We've actually got lots of questions come through for you and Julia, so I'm going to jump straight into those questions if that's all right. So the first one I'm going to put to Julia. How did the three countries that occupied Poland influence the expression of the Young Poland movement?
Thank you, Sophie. Well, in the simplest possible terms, because all the partitioning powers were trying to sort of impose their own cultural identity onto Poles, they wanted the Polish people to perish as a community and to take on their own cultural identities. This was especially the case with the stringent persecution by the Germans and by the Russians. The Austrians were relatively liberal, but on the whole, because of this oppression, ban on the use of the Polish language, sort of exile into Siberia, to forced labor camps, censorship on books, etc. What happened was that the Young Poland artists believed that everyday objects, interior decoration schemes, as well as the architecture of entire buildings, were in a way subversive, encoded carriers of Polishness. I mean, this was even the case with the Christmas tree decorations. Ironically, I think that it's a good example because ironically, the Christmas tree was a German invention, and the Christmas tree was imported into the Polish lands after the partitions in the middle of the 19th century. And of course, at that time, the traditional German Christmas tree decorations were glass, were sort of glass baubles, which were considered sort of kitsch and banal by Poles. They were machine produced. So the Poles adopted the Christmas tree, but the Krakow workshops produced its own take on the Christmas tree decorations, which couldn't be more different from the German ones, which the beautiful paper decorations that Roshin had shown, which represented the chief characters associated with the celebration of a Polish Christmas. So the belief in the agency of design to regain independence, which it did.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, there's obviously a lot of influence there. Apologies to Kasha, I called you Paulina earlier. I'm jumping ahead already to our next talk, so apologies about that. Kasha, I'm going to come to you next with the next question. Is there a danger that the arts and crafts movement can be hijacked to some extent by more extreme right-wing nationalism? What do you think about that?
Well, you know, it's difficult to... I'm not sure if I'm an expert on the subject. However, I wouldn't associate extreme right-wing nationalism as connected to any form of visual arts in a way, like, let's say, maybe there will be, of course, some differences in terms of like posters, I can imagine. So I'm not, as I say, I'm not an expert here, but I just think the bigger danger to arts and crafts, to historical arts and crafts, is just this sort of thoughtless reproduction of specific motifs, which I think in Zakopane is particularly visible in terms of using this absolutely unique historical style and then being reinvented in sometimes hideous ways, let's call it that way, in contemporary buildings, which are created, I don't know, as these some neo-Highlanders, palaces, etc. So they twisting the style, which was original and based on a very sort of, how to say it, of really strong relationship with the nature and where it came from. Suddenly it's blown up into these enormous sizes, etc. And I think this is specifically seen in Zakopane and in few villages around, like Białka Tatrzańska, Bukowina Tatrzańska, where this style is adapted to. But, you know, coming back to the question, I wouldn't say I can see any imminent danger from adaptation by any I don't know, extreme movement of these specific motifs. I'm not sure, maybe Julia would be better suited to answer this question than myself.
Thank you, Kasia. Well, I agree with Kasia. And in fact, what we've tried to show through our project is that young Poland brought people together. It's not about being divisive. It's about bringing people together back then, bringing together a divided nation back then, and bringing people together now. And secondly, if we look at a group of people who were persecuted, they were not allowed to speak their own language for 123 years. I wouldn't exactly call their activities nationalist in any sense or form. I would call it an admirable preservation strategy.
So I just quickly add, before we move to the next question, I just wanted to add to what Julia said, that, you know, what I tried to kind of stress halfway through my presentation, that, you know, I think the most important impact of the arts and crafts and Polish young Poland is actually in this relationship or status of artist within the society, and the fact that artist plays a specific role or has this very specific role, which is educational, so there is so on, and, you know, that could be adapted to, like, it's over 100 years since, and, you know, the world has changed, the history moved on, and, you know, but specific things still sort of are valid, like, you know, the education and, you know, stuff like that.
Thank you both very much for those perspectives. That's very useful. I've got another question here for Kasia. Is there synergy between our awareness of climate change and the resurgence in the arts and crafts movement, specifically in Poland?
Well, so I believe yes, because, you know, as a Zakopane example is showing, actually during this time when Zakopane was developing, there was a lot of you know, smaller societies that actually their main aim was to protect the wilderness, which was disappearing in their very eyes. For example, I know that by the beginning of 20th century, like by year 1901 or 2, in the area there was no brown bears at all, because they were all already killed as trophies, or, you know, they were also hunted by local Highlanders as well. So there was and to counter, sort of the attempt to counter that was at the time that actually the first societies to preserve nature were employing actually the people who were illegally hunting the animals in Tatra Mountains to, like, use their skills to protect the nature. So I see, you know, there is a very strong parallel of, obviously, we do have completely different, we're facing completely different problems right now. But you know, the pollution of the environment actually was very, very present in Zakopane, because, as I say, not only because of the sanitary problems and lack of public hospital, against which Witkiewicz was actually standing up to the city, but also the problem was from the industry, because it was an industrial town. There was a mine and there was iron works, and the trees were cut. So you know, it's a very long, very complicated relationship. And of course, the Tatra National Park was created after the Second World War, and you know, I guess, you know, sort of serve its purpose within the decades to try to protect the environment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Basia. I have one more question for you, Julia. I'm conscious that we are running a little bit over. So if we can just see if we can answer this one nice and quickly. The question is, one of the participants in today's session thought it was really lovely to see batik. I think that's probably from Roshin's talk as well, and was interested in knowing whether Asian traditions affected other elements of the Young Poland movement. And Julia, I think probably you're best placed to answer this one.
Well, I think the batik medium was the best example of this influence from Indonesia. I'm not aware of any other techniques. I mean, interestingly, the Krakow workshops also used batik on wood, not only on fabrics, and they produced fantastic boxes, decorative boxes, and sort of vases decorated with this technique. And however, the motifs, the ornamental motifs, were created by mostly by Krakowian peasants. So the motifs reflected traditionally Polish design. I don't know if Roshin may want to add anything.
Thank you, Julia. No, I mean, to my mind, it's the batik is what really, really stands out. And I suppose, in a way, by the time batik gets to Young Poland, it's not so much an Asian technique as such, because it's been filtered through France, it's been filtered through, you know, European sort of design for kind of 20 years by this stage. So I think it's not a case so much of Young Poland artists looking to Asia as such, it's that they're looking to other design movements in Europe, and what they're seeing is kind of by default Asian, rather than them sort of actively looking to Asia for the tradition. So I think, as with everything, as with William Morris and other things, you know, Asian design infiltrates European design a huge amount, but that's not always a self-conscious way of looking, and it's the batik which to me really stands out in that situation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Some really great detailed answers there. I'm going to take us to our break now. So I'm going to give us the full 10 minutes. So if everybody could be back, it's just 10 minutes. So back by 1:53 in UK time. It's 10 minutes from now. That would be fantastic. Just a note as well to say that it is my intention, as long as we can gather speaker permissions, to send you all of their presentations. So any sort of extra detail that you're missing from the presentations, or rather wanting to look into a bit more, you'll get that at the end of these sessions, probably next week. All right, thanks very much, everybody. See you soon.